Welcome in, everybody. Glad you're along, as always, on our little podcast here. Tony Gwynn Jr. coming up in a little bit. We'll talk all about the Padres, talk to him about his late father as well, and looking forward to that. Always enjoy visiting with Tony. We are presented each and every week by a couple of great clients. Huntington Bank. They're doing such a marvelous job in the banking industry. They've done it in many places in the country, and they have put down their feet, if you will, here in the state of Colorado, and you need to go see them. So we're presented by Huntington, where banking just clicks. Try asterisk-free checking with no monthly maintenance fee, no matter what. It's your money, so keep more of it. Make the switch today at huntington.com/yourmoney. And also by Steel, STIHL, steelusa.com. Just go there and go shopping. It's fun. I mean, spring is upon us, right? It's baseball season. It's clean up your yard season, and no entity out there is going to help you in that regard more than Steel. STIHL, steelusa.com. Check out all the great products, and there's a dealer right around the corner where you can pick up said products. SteelDealers.com will tell you where one is located. Love their stuff, have a garage full of it, and I suggest once you buy one, you'll buy a lot more. I love the battery-powered products. Makes it really simple. They last forever, and they are super powerful as well. So Steel, STIHL. All right, time to get rolling. Just came back for a quick few days back in Denver from Scottsdale, and some of the things as we work into the second half of spring training that I noticed. Number one, Nolan Jones, who got off to a slow start, has really started to swing the bat. Nolan, in a game that we televised a couple of days ago, went 4 for 4 and virtually hit everything hard that day. He had started to swing it better, hit into some hard outs the previous couple of days, and then the day after, in another game that we televised, he had a double. So he's raised the average up in the, I think, 275 range, somewhere in there, which is great to see, because Nolan Jones, for the Rockies to make that step we keep talking about, right? Nolan Jones has to build on not 2024, which because of injury and other factors was not a good season. He'd be the first to raise his hand to tell you that. But he needs to build on what he accomplished in 2023, where it's kind of a breakout season for Jones. 2020 guy, 20 homers plus, 20 stolen bases plus, and also those 19 outfield assists. So fingers crossed that you're starting to see Nolan Jones emerge down in spring training. Also Jordan Beck, who got off to a slow start. And they need Jordan Beck. They need a couple of somebodies in that other corner outfield, right field, to emerge. Jordan Beck hit a long home run the other day because he has scuffled some. So, as they start to accumulate at bats here in the second half of spring training, look at what Jones is doing, look at what Beck's doing, and a name that we've talked about the last couple of shows. He continues to impress, and that's Zach Veen. Zach Veen, hit another homer a couple of days back. He threw out a 3-run triple in a ball game we televised against the Padres. Yesterday, I think he stole at least one more base, if not 2 more bases. He's fun, and he's pushing. You can't, with young players, you can't just say, well, we have a lot of money invested in said player, and so he's anointed as the guy. You got to go and win that job. And even though Zach Veen has battled a lot of injuries and hasn't played a ton of baseball over the last couple of years and really just a cup of coffee at AAA, I wouldn't be shocked if he's involved early in this season if he continues to perform the way he has, because he gives the Rockies not only the potential upgrade of talent, but he gives them something they don't have a lot of. And that's kind of, a little swagger, a little moxie, which sometimes you assume you're going to get with a veteran guy that's been there, done that. But in this case, it may come from a youngster, a puppy, if you will, in Zach Veen. So it's something to keep your eye on with all 3 of those still young outfielders. Nolan Jones, certainly in terms of big league experience. Jordan Beck, obviously, up last year for the first time. And Zach Veen, who, when he does play in a big league game, for the first time. It will be, as I said, it will be his debut. You know what my eyes the other day? Bradley Blaylock. Bradley Blaylock came in the Nick Mears trade from Milwaukee last year. We saw him beat the Yankees. That was probably his highlight, pitching for the Rockies last year. What stood out for me is Bradley Blaylock has added about 2 to 3 miles an hour on his fastball. The other day, he was working 95, 96, flashed a couple of 97s, including in getting a strikeout. It seems like he's spinning the ball better. He's confident. He's still a young guy. Remember, he was a high school pick out of Georgia, not out of the University of Georgia. He wouldn't be a high school pick if he was at the University of Georgia. So there's a lot of growth there. Anytime you have a kid that's drafted right out of high school, he was originally drafted by the Red Sox. But Bradley Blaylock has kind of moved the meter a little bit and opened some eyes this spring. And he's a guy that may be in the bullpen as a long haul guy initially, but ultimately I think the Rockies still view him as a starting pitcher. And for the umpteenth time, you cannot have enough starters, especially if you're the Colorado Rockies. And it was impressive to see the fastball finish, the fastball velocity. Last year, he averaged about 93.5 on his fastball, which is solid. You know, Major League average is 94. But again, what we've seen in the spring in shorter bursts is much more than that. And you can see the confidence in talking to Bradley Blaylock. So another guy to keep your eye on. You know, as we tape today, Charlie Condon evidently hurt his wrist and potentially somewhat significantly in a spring training game, trying to make a diving catch the other day. We'll know more about it in the coming days, and obviously I'll comment more on it next week. But, this is a guy that was drafted 3rd overall, and you don't want him to start to go through that train wreck of battling injuries early in his career. Last year, he kind of played through a hand injury that supposedly impacted what he did in his first 100 at-bats, which, you don't worry a big or great deal about. He wasn't great in making his debut in high A, but now, depending on the significance of the injury, the process is going to be slowed down here in 2025. So fingers crossed that things turn out okay for Charlie Condon. Segueing for a moment to the NBA and more specifically the Denver Nuggets and their great 3-time MVP, Nikola Jokic. I don't normally dip my toes in the MVP conversation, especially when it's premature. But I suppose any sort of MVP conversation in the NBA or Hart Trophy conversation in the NHL, see Nathan McKinnon, is okay when you've played 3/4 of your season, as they have in both the NBA and the NHL. And seemingly in the NBA this year, it's going to come down to SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the wonderful and talented guard for the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have a wonderful record this year, better than the Nuggets, and the guy that's been a candidate and a winner, as I said, 3 times, seemingly every year, the last 5-6 years, and that is the Joker. And for those that are saying, well, it's a foregone conclusion now that SGA is going to be the MVP, I'm like, time out. And maybe there's a little bit of bias because I live in Denver and I watch the Nuggets on a regular basis. But one of the things that drives me bananas is this, it's SGA's turn, just like it was Joel Embiid's turn a couple of years ago. Think back to when Barry Bonds was dominating baseball. Think back to when Mike Trout was dominating baseball. Think back to when Michael Jordan was dominating the NBA. Guess what? If they're the best friggin' player and it's 6-7 years in a row, we all know who should win the MVP then. And in the case this year of the Joker, he's top 3 in the league in scoring. I know SGA is number 1. He's top 3 in the league in rebounding. He's top 3, for God's sakes, in assists. I believe he's top 3 in steals, by the way, for those that say, nothing gets done on the other end of the floor defensively. And oh, by the way, he's shooting a better percentage than SGA. So, yes, Oklahoma City has a better overall record, but they have a better cast and a much deeper cast than the Nuggets do. So you tell me, who's the best player in the league? And if people say, well, he's the best player, but he's not the most valuable this year, or that it's someone else's turn because we have voter fatigue of one guy winning it, that's bullshit. Vote for the best player. Who's the most valuable? I can tell you this much. Anybody with half a brain knows that if Jokic is not on the Nuggets, not available to the Nuggets, they're a lottery team, especially this year. So, yeah, I had to weigh in on that. Broncos. Broncos are winning free agency. Broncos had a really good defense last year, didn't they? Last time I checked. They now have picked up Dre Greenlaw, who's a, wizard sideline to sideline from a linebacker spot. That's going to be tremendous. Guy's been a Pro Bowler. They pick up Talanoa Hufanga, who's been All-Pro in the past, physical safety. So you have 2 additions defensively to what was already a very good defense, coordinated well by Vance Joseph. And you're going to get Alex Singleton back. These were 2 great moves. Offensively, it's no secret, the Broncos need more production from the tight end spot. So they go get a guy that's been a Pro Bowler on a couple of occasions, Evan Ingram. Familiar with Evan Ingram, he was drafted originally by the team, as you know, I followed my whole life, the New York Giants. Had some issues dropping the football earlier in his career, and on occasion it's reared its head since. But he had some really productive years after leaving the Giants. Battled some injuries last year, but on paper, gotta love on paper, right? Another strong addition. Another guy, by the way, who's been to some Pro Bowls. So the Broncos so far are doing wonderful things in free agency, and we haven't even gotten into the draft. I'll leave that for others over the next month. But the Broncos now, in my mind, made the playoffs last year, handled their business as well as they could in Buffalo and in the first round. There's a changing of the guard potentially that's going to take place in the AFC West. Is Kansas City always going to be formidable with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid? One would think so. Travis Kelce, we all know, is coming back for another year. Travis Kelce is not the same player. He'd be the first to admit that. Showed some age last year. Can't separate like he did. Can't have that little wiggle at the top of an option route to get open for Mahomes as easily as he's done throughout his Hall of Fame career. They lose an all-pro offensive lineman. Kansas City is coming back to the pack. I think San Diego, with Jim Harbaugh, is on the rise. And nobody's improved more in the last 12 to 18 months than the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos could win the AFC West next year. The Denver Broncos could do significant damage next year in the playoffs. And it has been a while, as we all know. I didn't mention the Raiders. You noticed that? Don't see the Raiders doing much this year. But it's been a great offseason so far for the Denver Broncos, and one would think it'll get better when the draft rolls around. I'm sure they're going to address the running back spot, which in this draft reportedly is as deep as we've seen in quite some time. And the running back spot is a position that typically you don't have to address in the first round. At least that's been the trend of late. So anyhow, Tip of the cap to the Denver Broncos. All right. My guest this week is a guy we've had on in the past, Tony Gwynn Jr. Tony played 8 years in the big leagues. We all know who Tony's father was, one of the greatest hitters of all time, the late Tony Gwynn. And I always enjoyed talking baseball with him. He's been a radio broadcaster since his playing days in his hometown with the Padres, and he's terrific at that. And it's fun to talk about a myriad of baseball topics with Tony Gwynn Jr. All right, Tony, before we talk important stuff like baseball, we're going to get the real important things. So you got four youngsters at home, and I forgot you are 3/4 girl dad, and you are
yes.
Your wife is soccer mom, but you are soccer dad. Huh? How your daughters doing?
They're doing very well. They just came back from a big national tournament out in Florida, and they all placed pretty well out of the 16 teams that qualified. And last month, my eldest daughter, Michaela, committed to go play at Grand Canyon University. So pretty exciting times in the Gwynn household.
I love that because as I talked to you off air about the fact that she's going to play down in Phoenix means during spring training, you get to see a lot of games. Yeah,
it definitely worked out best case scenario for myself and my wife in terms of being able to get to Arizona. I'll be in Arizona every year for at least the next 5, hopefully. So I get a chance to see her a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's tremendous.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, as a former professional athlete, do you get, and I think I know the answer to this because I was this way with my boys. You get far more nervous watching your daughters and your youngest play, I assume, than when you played.
For sure, because it's out of my control. All I can do is sit and watch and hopefully not yell too much. Whereas, playing, I at least have some control.
Right. So you have not gotten thrown out, have you? Please tell me you have not gotten thrown out of any.
No.
Okay.
My father, when he was around, when I was a youngster, came to games. You didn't hear a peep from him. I try to be like that. I'm not as successful, but I've never been kicked out.
I've never asked you this with your dad. When he was watching you, when did he offer up, not only life lessons, but practical baseball lessons? Was it off to the side? How did that work?
He was much more harder on me in basketball than he was baseball. I think he recognized playing the same sport, following his footsteps was already going to be a challenge in itself. And so he kind of was really hands off. He always waited till I came to him to ask for help. Very rarely, maybe when I was maybe 11 or 12, he might tell me I was trying to pull the ball too much. But outside of that, he really never said anything to me unless I kind of came to him.
How many times did you hear there's a lot of hits on the other side of the field?
I heard that pretty much every day of my life. So that wasn't so that was kind of ingrained in me at an early age. I guess I did have that advantage.
Did you work more with your dad or with your uncle, Chris?
I probably worked more with my dad, but I went to my Uncle Chris as it pertained to my career more because there were a little bit more similarities. There are some things my dad he didn't have an answer for because he had never experienced on his end. So my uncle was better suited to answer a lot of my questions in terms of, movement and how the organizations are going to work and things of that nature. We have a lot more similarities in our careers than what me and my father did.
I think it's probably, when you are the son of, an all-time great in any sport, we've heard this become cliche. It's hard sometimes for the truly great ones to coach, even though your dad was a heck of a coach, obviously at San Diego State, because they're like, it's like Barry Bonds. They're like, well, just do what I did. Well, there's very few people on the planet who could do what they did, right?
Right. Yeah, no, there's no doubt. I think my dad had to learn how to he had to learn some of those methods and how to connect, because a lot of the things. I'll give you a quick story. When I first signed in my first year in pro ball, playing in Beloit, Don Money, who was my first manager, asked my dad to come in and speak to the team. And we were talking hitting. And at some point, he started talking about being able to recognize in real time, mind you, whether a whole hand is covering the ball out of the hand, or if you see white out of the hand, which would indicate it's a fastball. And I had heard this before. So, I think to a lot of my teammates, mind you, we got some big leaguers in there. I mean, Ricky Weeks is in there, Prince Fielder's in there. And so I immediately kind of put my hand up and I said, Dad, I'm pretty sure no one else in this room sees any of that you're talking about right now. I was like, I'm your son, and I don't see some of that stuff that you're talking about right now. And so I say that to say, as he became a college coach, I think he had to learn how to find ways to connect, because some of the things were just innate to him. Some of the skills that he has were just God given to him, and he had to learn that. He eventually did.
I've talked to, and obviously you have, and you experienced it playing the big leagues for the better part of a decade. But one of the common traits, it seems to me, Tony, that the great hitters, the elite of the best in the world have, you ask them what their vision is, and it's always like Helton, I think, was 28 vision. I assume your dad had ridiculous vision, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, as far as I know, I think he was a 2010 guy for a long time. I mean, even his last years of his career, he still saw the ball well. It was, his knees at that point couldn't hold up. But the vision part, I think, is a separator for the best of the best. It starts with what your eyeballs are seeing, because that is then relaying to your brain what it is you're gonna have to face. And the faster you can do that, the better off you're gonna be. The better you can see, all of that things kind of are connected together, and obviously the skill set, that the physical skill set comes along with it.
Yeah, I always say that you have 0.4 of a second to make a decision, a swing decision. And if you are someone like your dad or Barry or Todd Helton, and you can see spin or identify a foot or 2 feet earlier than the average cat, pretty big difference.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you're talking about big leaguers in general, most of these guys have great vision. Now we're picking out like the 1% of those guys that have just ridiculous vision that, gives them a little bit more of an advantage.
Yeah. I used to love, I've told you this before, I used to love talking to your dad, and you've heard this from many people, because unlike a lot of superstars, your dad loved, again, the stuff loved talking ball. Didn't matter. 3 in the afternoon, sitting on, talking hitting, talking strategy. He just loved talking ball.
Yeah. I mean, he was a student of the game. I mean, that's not a cliche thing to say when it comes to my dad. He really enjoyed learning, I mean, from the guys that came before him, and then being able to apply real-time lessons to, what he was going through. And I think, I think that's a trait that, allows you to play that long. You know what I'm saying? When you enjoy those type of things, it really doesn't get old. It typically your body is the one that tells you it's time to hang it up.
I always said, I remember, and Tony, you'll tell me what the year was, but when your dad, kind of wheeled out, if you will, Ted Williams, I think it was an All-Star game, wasn't it?
99, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 99.
Did he ever share
Boston
with you the conversation or conversations he may have had with Ted Williams, who also, like your dad, loved to talk hitting?
Well, I mean, the initial conversation between him and Ted was documented. And if you see if you go back and you look at that video, I think Bob Costas is the one that narrates it, or that kind of is the guy asking the questions there. I think when you go back and look at it, my dad looked like a kid in class, like scared to put his hand up to answer a question because he didn't want to get it wrong. And I think that's kind of it was a kind of a sign of how much respect he had for Ted in getting this information. I mean, ultimately, after that conversation with Ted, his numbers started to change in a way that I don't think people thought they could. He started driving the ball more. He started, all of a sudden, instead of him kind of inside outing that inside fastball you threw him, he's now turning on it. And, whereas before it was a single, now we're talking extra bases. And you started to see a slug go up. You started to see his numbers go up from a power standpoint after that conversation, because as Ted put it to him, you got to be able to get them out of there so they go back out where you want them to be. And I think my dad really cherished the conversations they had in that 99. I mean, he was just so in awe of the fact that he got to be the one that Ted asked for. It wasn't planned for my dad to do it. Ted specifically asked for my dad to be the one to do it. And it was one of his biggest honors.
I wonder, if your dad was with us and playing in this era, because I think there were a lot of similarities with how your dad handled the bat to Ichiro, who's, going into the Hall of Fame, as obviously he should be, this summer, in that, I'd watch Ichiro take BP, and Ichiro, he'd hit him in the upper deck in right field. I mean, he could do anything he wanted, but, it was a high on base, high average approach, which is similar to your dad. If your dad was playing for the Friars in 2025, do you think he'd sacrifice 15, 20 points in his average to hit, 20 plus homers and raise that slug as you were talking about?
I don't think he would need to. I think the way he finished his career would have, I'd say the last 10 versus the first 10, I think you were dealing with a different type of hitter than you were the first 10. I think the type of hitter in the last 10 was the type of hitter that would have thrived in this environment here. There's a better zone in general than there was at any point in the 80s and 90s. That's just the cold hard facts, right? And I just think that ultimately, he would have been the same. He would have been the same type of hitter. You would probably saw a few more homers, but I don't know that he would have. I don't know that he would have wanted to be the type of player that was, hitting 30 homers and hitting 295 or 290. Even though those are terrific numbers, I think he enjoyed the art and the craft in the way that he approached it. It takes some. Listen, what I can tell you is for guys like Ichiro and my dad, that's a discipline that you have to have in order to day in, day out continue. Even though you can, open it up a little bit and hit some balls in the second deck when you want to, it takes a discipline to go out every single day and continue to work on the craft that you're already really pretty good at.
You're really good at your craft now of describing action, and you've been doing it for a long time on radio with the Padres. And I have to ask you, given your background and as we discussed with your dad, do you ever get, frustrated? You're upstairs with Jess and you're looking and you're like, okay, Padres won tonight 4-3, but they punched 13 times and the opposition punched 13 times. Just the great number of, swing and miss, if you will, that we now have in the modern game.
I don't know that I get frustrated. I have come to accept that baseball is constantly evolving, and it's been that way since I've been a part of this game. As a young kid in the '80s, I saw it evolve from a certain way players went about it till we got the 90s. We know what that era, had going at that point. And then the game constantly changes. And so, as much as the pendulum swung one way in terms of the sacrificing average to get more slug, you're slowly starting to see the pendulum start to swing back in the other direction. You're starting to see it in the way guys are talking about the swing. You're starting to see it in the approaches at the plate. That's what made last year so fun watching the Padres play, because you mentioned they didn't have a lot of punch to them. That team put the ball in play, and so many good things happen. And when you got guys like Arise and last year a Profar and a Solano, guys who are approaching hitting in a way that I think was kind of what you would call the old way, right? And having a lot of success doing it. It can be a weapon for a team in certain parts of the lineup.
Your dad, obviously, and I know this was written quite a bit after the trade, you would think he would really like Luis Arise, right?
Sure.
Guy who puts it in play, a guy who gets hits and is comfortable in his own skin. Like, that's who he is, and he's okay with that.
Yeah. Right. I think, listen, to me, baseball is at its best when you got some uniqueness to every player. Everybody's not trying to do the same thing. And I think guys like Luis Arise prove that you can have success in this league, and it's not necessarily about, just hitting the ball out. You can have some diversity up and down your lineup, and it'll probably serve you well. You have less holes to attack when there is, not one type of player up and down. Now, can you have 9 of Luis Arise in your lineup? No, probably not. You're probably not going to be able to win a bunch of games, but you have those guys, put in the right spots of your lineup. They can be tremendous assets. And I just think the game is better when there have some offensive diversity that, people get a chance to see the skill set.
Yeah, 100%. One of the guys that really made a name for himself, not only in San Diego, but nationally last year, was Jackson Merrill. And, as a converted shortstop, tremendous athlete in center field. Tony, I want to start, as you're going to pontificate on what a wonderful player I'm sure he is. I read something the other day that I friggin' loved. He said his mindset this spring training, and this was one of the better players in the league last year, and certainly one of the top rookies along with Paul Skeens. He said his goal is to make the team this spring. I loved hearing that. It told me about his humility. It told me about his discipline, his focus, and not feeling like, okay, I've already been anointed.
Yeah, that's why he's unique. I think we were talking earlier about guys loving to talk ball. This dude eats, he sleeps, he dreams. It's all he thinks about is baseball. You know what I'm saying? And that's not always the case. And when you get a guy that loves baseball, remember the Padres are when you look at the roster, it's a pretty veteran team. Young veterans, but veterans nonetheless. He's coming up in an environment where he has some veteran support. And this is the kind of thing that can, I think, happen when a rookie comes up and he's surrounded by guys who've been in the league and have been taught by other guys, how to be a pro. He already comes with that package in himself. That's what makes Jackson Merrill. But there are certain things that you go through that you've never been through, and to be able to have veterans like that, I think goes a long way. And I think that just speaks to him saying, I want to go out and make this team. Like he has the respect of those guys in that locker room, and he respects where he's at. He respects it certainly isn't a given that you get to the big leagues. It's an earned right. And I think he just respects the fact that you got to earn it. I think we all know that Jackson Merrill, though, is going to be on the team one way or another.
I think he makes the team. I mean, I'm out in San Diego every day, but at least from afar, I think he makes the squad. Right?
I think it's a safe bet. Safe bet.
I like that. Yeah, I'll go to Vegas with that and see if see what kind of odds I can get. Tony, this is sports cliche, which I try my best to stay away from. But do the Padres this year collectively feel like we have unfinished business? 93-69, second to the hated Dodgers, and we'll get into the LA thing in a little bit on a global perspective, if you will. Great series, division series. You're up 2-1. Obviously, we know the Dodgers went on not only to win the next two games, but to capture a world championship. Is that kind of the mantra, though, like unfinished business for San Diego this spring?
I think Manny used those words specifically when he was talking about it at the beginning of spring. So clearly this team has heard all of the noise. They've seen the same thing everybody else has seen. They've heard the noise, I think, at home about, not being able to compete because they haven't necessarily been able to go, hit for hit with the Dodgers in terms of who they brought in to better their team. But I think this group also feels like we have a really good team. And if we stay healthy, just as we did last year when the same kind of noise was being made when Ohtani signed there, they get the pitching on the back end of that beginning of last off season. They remember coming out and giving the Dodgers a lot of problems throughout the course of the season. So I don't think their confidence has ever wavered in terms of what they think they can do in this division.
Well, when you roll out, we talked about a rise. We talked about a young Jackson Merrill. I'm still, I love Jake Cronenworth. But, you run out Manny at third every day. Xander now is going to move back to short. Let's not forget the kid in right field's pretty talented, Fernando Tatis. No one's feeling sorry for the Padres. But I think sometimes everyone gets overshadowed, especially in the division, by the Dodgers. And from where we stand, in Denver, I look over at that Padre lineup that we get to see, and I love watching you guys play. And I'm like, damn, I mean, that's a long lineup, man.
And people forget, right? Because the Dodgers have done what they've done. They've seemingly brought in anybody and everybody that was possible to bring in. But that doesn't change the fact that when you line it up and they run out on the field and those same names are actually coming to the plate, the Dodgers know that it's not a cakewalk. Whoever's on the mound that day knows I got to be locked in or this team could put up 11 or 12 in a hurry. And so, again, there's so much coverage on this that I think we kind of all get wrapped into what's happening. At the end of the day, they have to get on the field. And just as we saw in the World Series last year, if you can't do the fundamentals of the game, it will roll downhill on you real quick. And so that's how I think they're looking at it. I think those of us who've been around the game know that that's going to be the case, that you have to go out and play the games. Certainly the Dodgers are, the creme de la creme. I don't think there's any argument there. But there's a reason why these things have to play out over a course of 162.
That's why I love baseball so much. One of the, myriad of reasons I love it so much in that, the Dodgers will be the odds-on favorite. The Dodgers have seemingly a real sexy name at every spot, and they have, an abundance of great players. But guess what? That doesn't necessarily mean you win jack.
It means nothing.
It means nothing. One of my favorite guys now that I love watching, and Tony, you and I have gotten to know each other over the years. I have mad respect for kind of chip on the shoulder guy, and I have mad respect for guys who post up in every sport.
Yeah.
And so from afar, when I used to watch Manny Machado in Baltimore, obviously great player, didn't know a lot about him. He was in the other league, if you will. Now that he's been on the West Coast for a while, and I've told Manny this, I love that dude because I know he's hurting sometimes, and he posts up every single day. And I we're going back to your dad and going back to you. You had a fine big league career. I know that's appreciated in the Gwynn household.
Without a doubt. I mean, listen, and you kind of hit on it. I mean, prior to this spring training, Manny hasn't been close to 100% in 2.5 years, and still out there playing and finding ways. I mean, he wasn't even supposed to start the season last year until somewhere around May. He beat that timeline in time for the opening day in Korea and kind of worked his way through it. When he got, healthier, you saw what he did in pretty much May on. Like he was a guy who, was in the MVP conference. This guy is a bona fide guy. He posts every year. And I think the thing that I have a tremendous amount of respect for Manny is his growth since he's been here in San Diego. He's learned to figure out what type of leader he wants to be and what's going to work best for the team. And I just think, I don't think it's by circumstance that when Manny's right and he's going well, this team is usually one of the better teams in the league. And this year, I think the thing I'm really excited about is, this is the first time I've heard him ever even talk about his health. And that to me is an indication that he might actually finally be healthy this year. What is he going to do when he's fully healthy over the course of the season? Now, he won't stay 100%. No one does if you're posting every day. But just to be close to it, Manny is putting together a really terrific career. And it's San Diego's are going to be to say they saw the majority of it when it's all said and done.
Yeah. You know another guy who's battled some health things and we know, some certain things off the field, if you will, that is as talented as virtually anybody in the game. You know where I'm going, and that's the former shortstop, Fernando Tatis Jr. What do you got on him as he's a veteran now, man? Remember when he was a puppy and he showed up, but this guy's a vet now.
I can just tell you what I've seen from him in spring this far. I've seen a guy who's more vocal than I remember him being. It doesn't mean he's out there rah-rah-rahing, but, in moments where he feels like he should say something, he says stuff. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's, again, you got to remember how young Toddy was when he came to the league. When he got here, he was 21, I believe he was when he got here. I mean, that's really young. And there's some growth that takes place when you start in the big leagues that young and you get to the point of his career now. And the crazy thing that, at least from my standpoint from Toddy, is I don't even think we've seen the ceiling of Toddy. And this is a guy who's already hit 40 homers in this league. I think he has an MVP type run in him. And I think he's healthy. I think he is changed some things, it looks like, a little bit at the plate, at least from a stance standpoint. And I like where he's at. I think this team really talks a lot about building on what they did last year. And what they did last year was they learned how to be a lineup that was a unit versus individuals. And I think that's when I'm watching their at bats there in spring, it seems like that's what these guys are locked in on and focused on.
Will you miss Ha-Seong Kim defensively?
Yeah, we'll miss him. We'll definitely miss him defensively. I mean, obviously, he was a Gold Glover over at shortstop at one point. And so I think you miss his defense, but I think the defensively, I think we'll be fine. I mean, I like Jake at second. I think he's going to do a heck of a job. If Jose Iglesias ends up making this ball club, he certainly has got off to a terrific start since being here in camp. I think that enhances our defense as well. I mean, whatever we might have lost with Ha-Seong Kim, if Iglesias is showing what we've seen him show last year and the year before, I think the defense will be just fine. We
saw you guys. We had you guys on the tube a couple of days ago down in Scottsdale, and Iglesias, who we know well with the Rockies because he played for the Rockies a few years ago. He had the ridiculous run last year, not only from a musician standpoint, right? But he was fabulous for the Mets. I mean, he was off the charts good, right? So clutch. He has some of the best hands I have ever seen. Period. Right?
He may have it. He may has aged as he's gone from a young pup to where he's at now. His hands certainly haven't. I mean, I think his hands are as good as they were the first time I saw him in a Detroit Tiger uniform. I don't think much has changed. He might have gotten even better from that time, honestly. And that's hard to say because his glove to me has always been one of the most magnificent that I've seen in person.
Yeah. And Tony, I know you do what I do, and I like watching guys take ground balls. Watching Iggy take ground balls at 4:30 in the afternoon, it's special because he does stuff other guys can't do. And these are all the best and the best of the best in the world. And he does stuff with his hands. The only guy that I can think of that approached it was probably Vizquel with the sleight of hand.
That's who he reminds me a lot of is Omar in terms of how good their hands are. They're always he's always. It really is. It is really, if you enjoy that kind of thing, and I guess you're kind of a baseball nerd if you do, but that is what you want to see for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So what could be the kryptonite to the Padres? Again, 93 wins. In large measure, you're bringing back the same team. You got a nice rotation. Keep your fingers crossed. You stays healthy. Dylan Cease stays healthy. You went and get Pivetta. You went and got Pivetta. On paper, this is a really good baseball team.
Yeah, I think the kryptonite, if there is one, I think it could be injury or not the right kind of depth. When you look at the starting rotation, can you absorb an injury? Because listen, those are a part of the 162 that we play. Can you absorb, if injury hits your team, can you absorb a hit at the front half of your rotation? 1, 2, 3, or 4. I think that's a legitimate question. If anybody gets injured out of that, 1 through 9 lineup, who's the one that you just can't do without? And quite frankly, I think that the way this lineup works, I think you need all the pieces to kind of be there in order for it to the kind of the engine to work the way it should.
Yeah. Tony, I got to ask you this. Is we discussed it a little bit earlier. Is what is happening with the Dodgers and even with the Mets, obviously, with Steve Cohen's ridiculously deep pockets, is it good for baseball? Or as someone, again, who played for a long time, do you feel like, what, something's got to change now? Because the on paper, the difference between the haves and have-nots is as significant, perhaps, as we've ever seen.
It's really tough to say, Drew, because, I don't think it's just as simple as, I think at the end of the day, the thing that could turn this thing on its head, and we've heard Commissioner Rob Manfred talk about, the possibility of centralizing, the TV stuff, right? And it all coming in one place. I mean, those teams' ability to have their own income off of the TV side of it makes it, I think gives them an advantage. I don't necessarily know that it's the specific rule of deferrals or any of that. So I don't know at the end of the day. I know it's a long, complicated thing that kind of has to iron itself out. I do think 2026 is the year to kind of circle because, yes, the collective bargaining agreement comes up, but that TV situation, I think, comes to a head at that point, which I think could ultimately change the way teams operate and possibly level the playing field better, depending on how it falls.
I always, I talked to Spilly about this, Tony, and you're a great person to talk about this. 90+% of the league is represented by the Ryan Spilborgs, the Tony Gwynn Juniors of the world. We gravitate to the Shoheis and the Sotos
Right.
and the Manny Machados and the Fernando Tatises, and we get it. I mean, they're in the upper 1%, but guess what? The rank and file may feel differently, and I guess somewhere in there is a question, Tony, about put your playing shoes back on and go, how would you feel? Because respectfully, you were not going to be in a position to make 30 or 40 million a year, and 90% of the league plus is not in a position. The average, for folks who forget, it's 3 years. That's the average big league career. It's not 10, 12, 14 years. So is the salary cap a horrible thing for the rank and file?
I think what I would tell you is I watched my dad, and I watched a lot of those guys get locked out and have the season end when it did in August, and they sat out or they were locked out in when spring training rolled around the next year, but eventually they set up, or they laid the groundwork for what these players have now. And so I say that to say, I don't know if a salary cap fixes it, but I know that there were a lot of players that came before that were adamant about not having a salary cap. And I'm pretty sure these players still feel the same way. So that's why it's a tough question, right? Because it needs to come from both sides. Like, the players are going to have to want that in order for it to really happen. I mean, and here's the other thing, the consequences of getting that. What are you going to have to do in order to get that? I would imagine it's going to take a pretty long shutdown in order for something like that to happen. Does anybody really want that? Are teams not making enough money? Like, you start to weigh the pros and cons of this thing. And is it worth it to everybody to go through that to solely get a salary cap?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's fascinating. I mean, selfishly for us, work stoppage is not good. I mean,
No.
right? Work stoppage is not. You forget there's collateral damage. The guy who makes 40 million and has to sit down for a second, they can handle that more than the guy who's
the rank and file.
Beer.
And so, I that's not to say that I don't think, something needs to be done. And that's not to even say that I'm thinking about myself in this. I'm just saying there are so many consequences that come with what would have to happen in order for that to take place. And listen, we all lived through 2020 and not having sports, not having anything for that period of time. I think it would take longer in order to get what everybody's talking about.
Yeah. And then nobody talks about the overall damage, because we have the shortest attention span as a populace than we've ever had in human history. So if something goes away for a long period, they're like, all right, I moved on.
Just think about 94. I mean, how long it took for fans to come back in a time where we had a little bit more attention span. We were willing to kind of hang it out a little bit longer. I mean, it took 2 years before people really forgave baseball for that. And that was only from August to the following, into the following season a little bit. So, I don't know. I think it's all fun to talk about these type of things. These are very serious matters. And they're going to have to be addressed again here in another couple of years. But, I think sometimes we get too loose with, the things that we think would help the game more and not think about what it would take to get there.
Yeah, 100%. And again, as you well know, Tony, not in that ownership room of 30 diverse owners, they're not all on the same page, not even close.
Right. And listen, they're also trying to make it 32 at some point. And
Right.
so, like, how does all of that play into it? I'm not smart enough to know, but they pay people who certainly are ready
Right.
for this, I guess.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to get you out on this, and I always appreciate your time.
Anytime.
I'm going to go back to Dad for a moment. We always talk, naturally, you gravitate to baseball, talking about your dad. That or the fact that he's still the all-time assist leader on Montezuma Mesa for San
I
Diego
enjoy
State.
that still very much. I enjoy being able to say that still. That's pretty
right?
cool.
Yeah, Dad's still the all-time assist leader. Here's another one, by the way, that you know well that a lot of people don't realize. Do you know the first time I ever saw Tony Clark? I was doing a basketball game at San Diego State, and Tony Clark had transferred from Arizona and was the star basketball player. I didn't even realize he played. I mean, I think I probably knew in his bio that he was a baseball player, but I didn't know much about him as a baseball player. Like, this guy's a pretty good basketball player.
Yeah, Tony could hoop, man. I mean, there's a lot of that going in San Diego a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the best piece of advice your dad gave you away from baseball, away from hoops?
The best piece of advice really applied. It came in sports, but it applied to really everything. And the thing he told me that I tell my children, and I think about to this day, is the work you put in is what you'll get out. And I've always, he told me that when I was young in my career, my professional career, baseball. And once I learned how to apply that and what it truly meant, I realized, well, that really applies to anything that you're doing. Like if I want a certain result, I'm still going to have to go in and I'm gonna have to work towards those results in order for that to happen. And so that's the thing I apply to everything I do moving forward.
Yeah, that's you know what? It's great advice. And as many people as you and I both know, away from sports, CEOs, people who've been, very successful, there's a common trait, and that is work ethic, right?
No doubt.
Uncommon work ethic. Uncommon work ethic.
Tony, that is definitely the common denominator of those.
Yeah. I will see you. I didn't even look at the schedule. You got to study up tonight on what team again? I forgot who you told me you were playing.
I think we got the Rangers tonight, actually.
You got the Texas Rangers. And yes. It's at your place, right?
Night game, our place, yes.
Right, which means of names you've heard of, like you ain't seeing Marcus Semien.
Nope,
you're not seeing that 6'5" shortstop. He's not coming up.
Not at 640. We're not. No shot. No shot. We probably wouldn't see him at 110 either. But either way.
No. But remember, by the way, remember the days where it was a league rule you had to have at least 4 starters that were traveling?
It's still supposed to be a league rule, by the way. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, I did a game the other day against the Rockies were playing the Padres, your club, and there was a whole lot of 97s running around out there. Some dude had 103, came to the plate. He had 3 digits on his back.
I think I saw the same thing. I was at that game.
Tony, thanks, man. You're the best. I'll see you soon.
Drew, thanks for having me on, brother.
Okay, talk to you, man. Be good. Big thanks, as always, to Tony. And it's always, as I said, fun to visit with him. Padres are going to be tough. We didn't even get into Arizona. We'll talk more Arizona here in the coming weeks. We get ready for the 2025 baseball season. Arizona's got a wonderful pitching staff. The Giants, always make noise. That's why it's tough for the Rockies. I mean, it is really tough in that division. Hopefully the Rockies can make some noise also. Before we depart this week, I would love to be the proverbial fly on the wall at the dinner this weekend, the reported dinner, when Mikko Rantanen comes back to town with the Dallas Stars. And he goes out with his old buddy Nathan McKinnon. Maybe EJ will be there. Kale McCarr. Who knows who else will be involved in that dinner? And what he reveals to his close friends about the last month and, going to Carolina. Shockingly, he was surprised. He admitted that when the trade came down, and now signing an 8-year, $96 million deal with the Dallas Stars. But it would be fun to, as I say, be a fly on the wall and hear what he reveals, and if there's any regret in not signing with the Avalanche, whatever the final offer, the best offer was from Colorado. So I won't be that fly on the wall, but it would have been fun. That'll do it. I hope you enjoy your week. Stay safe, stay well, everyone, and we'll chat again in about 7 days. Talk to you.